Have you ever driven down a 10-kilometer stretch of road at 10 kilometers an hour for 10 straight hours in the middle of winter? No? Just us? Anyway, here we were looking for the elusive Canada lynx and failing miserably. As people do when they're bored out of their minds, we began discussing what ails our society. Like a stubborn string hanging from a favorite sweater, we started pulling at the thread of the problems facing Canada. And pulling it and pulling it. Before we knew it, a wee little string ended up unraveling the whole darn sweater. What we thought were a couple of isolated problems we began to realize were interconnected and serious and eroding the democracy of the place we love and call home. And when you're cold and bored and startled by a sudden realization, there's only one thing you can do. Pull out the trusty stack of Post-it notes, Sharpie, and design Nature Labs.
That, friends, is how this was born. What came next? Well, a few things.
Chocolate disappeared, and then some really weird stuff happened. Fires, floods, car accidents, concussions.
There were a few concussions in the making of this project.
Numerous health crises, and that whole global pandemic thing.
You can't make this stuff up.
Turns out we're apocalypse magnets.
Like Nature Labs itself, this wasn't a simple journey. And if we knew how hard it would be, who knows if we'd actually have taken the plunge. But we did, and here we are.
It aged us a bit, eh? Kind of like one of those before and after president portraits.
Anyway, to tell you this story, like most behind-the-scenes stories, it starts with a pre-story.
Jill grew up with an aching back in small-town rural Ontario. From an early age, she had a passion for exploring and learning. It's where her thirst for teaching was sparked. After studying urban planning and geography in university, she went into teaching, working at a high school in downtown Toronto for 10 years. I grew up in suburban Vancouver, British Columbia. I combined a passion for storytelling and bears and launched an organization called the Spirit Bear Youth Coalition at the age of 13. My goal was to help rally young people to give a voice to the white Kermode or spirit bear on Canada's west coast. I thought it would take a few months. 2 decades later, the spirit bear was saved.
Through both of our journeys, we saw problems in our society that concerned us. And we both were becoming increasingly worried that fewer and fewer people were thinking critically and acting creatively when addressing the challenges that we face. A bigger problem still, more and more people were losing their connection to and their appreciation for nature. And when too few understand why nature matters, too few have a complete picture of the issues at hand, making solutions imperfect, or worse, incomplete.
We traveled to small-town Saskatchewan and big city Montreal and remote Clyde River and everywhere in between to really understand what our nation thinks about each other and about the issues that we face, and how nature might be used as a tool to learn, heal, and act.
And after 300 conversations across the country over the course of the year, we were ready to act. We were ready to start building Nature Labs. Or so we thought.
Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. In Canada, education is the jurisdiction of the provinces, which means every student in every province and territory learns a bit differently. If you're wondering if that's why different regions see the world differently, well, it certainly doesn't help. So to create a national education project like Nature Labs, it requires balancing 13 different authorities and their various mandates.
That's fun.
But not as fun as Jill studying the curricula at every high school grade in every province.
Why? She needed to figure out how we could meet provincial mandates and help each of you learn from the same material. Talk about commitment. Talk about the easy part. Because next came money.
There are many foundations and government grants and social investment funds in Canada, but there are just a few catches. Almost no one wants to fund, in no particular order, salary, complexity, equipment, nuance, something new, something risky, and issues that aren't on the front page of the Globe and Mail or trending on Twitter. What funders really like? Schools in Africa. Wait, what? The money didn't always go to schools in Africa?
Look, my point is that an unconventional nature literacy startup that champions nuance and complexity wasn't exactly the easiest sell, even if chasing and funding that shiny object is what contributed to the problems that we see today in society. That, friends, is called irony. But it's also called a gigantic bloody pain.
A bigger pain? We can't all agree on which foundations and government grants and social capital funds in Canada are lacking a political bias. And though that might not matter if the plan is to speak to just those on one side of our political divide or get a bunch of likes on Facebook, if the goal is to bridge the divide and do something meaningful, it actually matters a lot.
To make this project relevant to each one of you, in every school, in every community across this country, we realized we couldn't accept money from any big organization or foundation or company that might tell us what to say or what stories to tell, or most importantly, what you should think.
After all, each of you view nature differently. Each of you view our world differently. and you should see your perspectives and opinions and ideas and concerns and issues reflected back to you in what you learn. And you should also see those perspectives and opinions and ideas and concerns and issues challenged and debated.
That's how we learn. That's how we talk and find solutions. But that only happens if you believe that we're not forcing you to reach a certain conclusion. And the only way that we could assure you of that—
while building Nature Labs, we refuse to take money from the major foundations and corporations that our society judges to be divisive, whether that judgment is right or not.
Of course, there is a flip side to saying no to big money. We basically became full-time volunteers for several years.
We rationed money and food and turned almost every square centimeter of our small apartment into a production studio.
No money also meant our goal of filming nature became, at first, much more complicated.
As you know, a big part of Nature Labs is storytelling, and though we've produced hundreds of stories for you, all of the stories tie back to one larger story, a narrative arc that connects the dots and underscores why nature can be a perfect metaphor for our fragile yet resilient society. To tell that story, we first went to the place chock full of good, complicated national nature stories, Parks Canada.
One problem: we discovered while it's free to take a photograph in a national park, we were told that if you flip that switch in the back of your camera to video, you have to buy a license. One designed for Hollywood movies, but applied to almost everyone. I kid you not. Being the Oppo-Taku of Hollywood, we couldn't afford the license, or the other limitations that went along with it, like providing 2 weeks written notice of the location of where we intended to film a wild animal that likely itself didn't know where it would be foraging in 2 weeks, let alone us.
The solution? BC Parks.
And were we ever lucky? The third largest park agency in North America also has licenses for filmmaking, but they have wildly creative leaders willing to make exceptions to help test new ideas, like Nature Labs.
BC Parks embraced us from day one and assigned us Mount Robson Provincial Park and the incredible story of Chocolate the grizzly bear.
And the rest, as they say, was, well, really complicated.
Once we knew where we'd be filming and what story we could tell, next up was interviewing a diverse cross-section of Canadian citizens to help explain your lessons and link lessons to current events. Many people didn't get back to us, but more than 100 people did. Well, more than that, but some didn't show up for the interview. We crisscrossed the country in our car to sit down with top chefs and former prime ministers, researchers and frontline laborers, innovators and mathematicians, and authors of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and Article 35 of the Constitution, and producers of TV shows, and a producer who made a movie on a guy who tried to save a bear. We think the interviews are mostly fascinating and provocative, and we hope you agree. Certainly you're not going to love every interview, but that matters too. There should be something for everyone.
Like everything else about this adventure, the interviews could have gone more smoothly.
We could have had better cameras or eyes that would have alerted us to the fact that a subject was out of focus. We could have had better earphones or ears or brains to know our audio was picking up an air conditioning unit and not the voice of our subject.
We also could have had a crew of, actual professionals.
Though we both have a background in photography, we never attempted video before Nature Labs and never even contemplated audio.
Like most people in the 21st century bootstrapping a project, we honed our skills on YouTube and went for it. And then on interview 3, the wire connecting our microphone to our camera shorted and caught fire. They never warned us about that on YouTube.
After, at times, 8 interviews a day, we looked forward to a change of pace and working in the field in Mount Robson Provincial Park. We didn't anticipate it would become a 16-month odyssey of living in a tent. Across 4 years, we camped for almost 500 days. That's 10,000 hours, and there was no glamping involved. We did thankfully up our camera game thanks to Nikon generously loaning us gear for part of our time in the field. But that joy quickly diminished when, on day 3 of production, Chocolate decided to go for a wander out of Mount Robson and into neighboring Jasper National Park, a place we were not allowed to film in.
Oh wow, was that a problem?
We lost Chocolate's trail and there was no obvious immediate backup story to this iconic grizzly. All we could do was search and start filming our virtual hikes and drives while freaking out that we were missing Chocolate's return.
There was another consequence of all of this. With Chocolate missing, our planned timeline for finishing Nature Labs went out the window, and people started losing faith in our ability to actually finish the project. We suddenly couldn't predict when we'd be done because we couldn't predict when Chocolate would actually surface again. The crowdsourced funding that we were receiving started to dry up, and so too did the camera gear that we desperately needed. In fact, twice we were within days of losing our apartment. Talk about stressful.
And then we hit a deer in the dark, totaled our car, gave ourselves his and her matching concussions, and were stranded in rural Alberta because it was Thanksgiving and our insurance company only could help us during regular business hours.
Not good.
But not as bad as that whole global pandemic thing.
The uncertainty was suffocating and scary, as I'm sure it was for you too.
We still had to figure out how to keep searching for chocolate in a now closed park.
As hard as that was, it didn't come close to this bombshell news. A serendipitous conversation with two Parks Canada employees revealed that chocolate was dead and had been for over a year.
Thankfully, as you know, this wasn't the end of our story, of Nature Labs' story.
One bureaucrat in the BC government, Natasha Ewing, heard of our ordeal and was determined to find a solution. Though she had nothing to gain, she took it upon herself to help us find a new narrative story in the midst of a global pandemic and get us permission to cross the closed border from Alberta to BC to film it. The power of one person to change the world for someone else.
And thanks to her, she gave us the hopeful story we so desperately needed to tie everything together, allowing us to use nature as the metaphor for the challenges we're facing in our society. Of course, the path from documenting this story of two sibling bears to post-production to your classroom wasn't smooth.
I mean, it's us after all.
Our oven exploded and our apartment caught fire. Our neighbor's pipe burst and our apartment flooded. We lost heat and hot water for a month when it was -40 outside and we had to move. Our new apartment lost heat and hot water for over a month when it was -40 outside and we had to move again.
Even our bank accidentally canceled our credit cards and it took 6 tries, 6 weeks to mail us replacement cards because they kept putting our phone number down as our address. Of course they did. Oh, and we both got COVID a day before the booster was made available.
Obviously, with our luck, Jill got long-haul COVID and was in and out of hospital for a year. Me, you ask? I collapsed while running and was told I was going to die, didn't die, and was eventually diagnosed with an undetermined neurological condition that, since August 2022, has given me stroke-like symptoms and, at times, robs me of the ability to speak, walk, or hold things. Did we mention both our families were simultaneously dealing with health crises?
And yet, despite all of that, despite an absurd number of setbacks and bad luck and confounding situations that still make no sense to this day, here you are, using Nature Labs. Our dream has become a reality.
We could have spent the last several years learning to make sourdough bread instead of learning audio, but we didn't. Instead, we lived in a tent held together by duct tape for months on end. We hiked almost 1,000 kilometers in shoes, mostly held together by duct tape. We drove tens of thousands of kilometers to find and tell the stories of our society, a car that, at times, was held together by duct tape. And before you ask, no, we didn't eat duct tape to save money. We ate meal bars that only tasted like duct tape.
We did all of that and worked away for 15 hours a day, 365 days a year. No weekends, no vacations, for 5 years to see if we could make Nature Labs a reality. There are many, many, many worse things happening in Canada and around the world right now. We know that. What we've gone through pales compared to what too many have and continue to endure, which is why we never gave up.
What we produced, it is an experiment. It's the byproduct of two people's passion and drive to do our part to help you unleash your creativity to do something different, to find new answers to old, if growing problems.
Nature Labs isn't perfect because, as you can see, we're not perfect. But it's our sincere hope that the foundation we built is simply a starting point, a chance to test and refine, a chance to grow our team and augment our skills, a chance to take what we have and enhance it in ways that you want to see.
With that caveat, hopefully you like what you see and understand the good intentions behind it.
We've tried to tell nature stories in new ways, tried to make Nature Labs a little less David Attenborough and a little more TikTok. And we've never allowed others to influence what you see. We haven't and never will tell you what to think.
We hope this tool makes education more exciting, more fun, more relevant. We hope you see the connections between what can be boring, dry curricula and important real-world issues. We hope you better understand why nature matters, why every decision we make every single day interconnects and impacts nature and our future in ways big and small.
And mostly, we hope that you feel challenged, yet empowered. We hope this platform helps you find your voice and your passion and your place in this world, allowing you to be that better steward, to be that better citizen every day for the rest of your life. Because that's nature literacy, and that's our dream. And this, it was our story, but now it's your story. We can't wait to see what you'll do next.